I found a video of myself online. But it's not me. I remember the exact second I knew something had gone wrong. A lazy Sunday morning, coffee gone cold on my desk, and a browser tab open to a forum I never frequented. The thumbnail stared up at me like an accusation. Grainy, dim hallway light, a figure standing at the end with my face. I clicked because curiosity is a dishonest friend. The first frame settled in my stomach like gravel. It showed me, Cameron Ward, 28, living in an old townhouse in Portland, walking through my own apartment, doing things I hadn't done, saying words I had never spoken. The video was tagged with a timestamp from 12 hours earlier. I tell you this not because I want sympathy, but because the ordinary detail matters. The hum of my refrigerator, the way the sun cut across the floorboards, the habit of leaving my phone face down. It's the small certainties that make the impossible sharp. I watched it once, twice, until the image blurred, and with each pass something in me rearranged. The man on screen moved with my gait, laughed in a way I recognized from old home videos, reached for the mug that sits by my couch the same way my hand does. Only he wasn't me. His eyes didn't find the camera the way mine would. There was a flatness to him, an imitation that sat on top of my features like a mask. I should have closed the laptop and called someone. Instead, I opened my messages, grabbed my keys, and walked the 3 blocks to my neighbor's apartment to ask if she'd left a camera on the landing. She pressed her lips together and said no, like I was being childish. The footage had been uploaded across multiple spaces, forums, a private torrent, a social video site where it had a handful of comments from accounts that smelled of bots. But all of them showed the same minute-by-minute version of a life I'd lived, twisted into a sequence I couldn't own. The first strange thing happened at the 18-minute mark. If you want to keep reading with any sense of sanity, take this as the boundary line. At 18:22 on that video, the man who looked like me stopped in front of my hallway mirror and, without hesitation, touched a thin white scar along his left jaw. I have no scar there. If the figure were an actor, he'd found some private marker to anchor the imitation. If he weren't, then the whole world was suddenly larger and more dangerous than it had been while I slept. I spent that afternoon cross-referencing everything I could, timestamp metadata, the upload IPs, the handful of re-uploads. There were no helpful answers, only more tracks that led to locked profiles and vanished domains. The comments beneath the video were predictably cruel, some praising the uncanny resemblance, others trying to pin down the location, a few whispering supernatural explanations like they were trading in urban lore. One user wrote, "He's a shadow copy," and another, with less whimsy, asked if it was an elaborate deepfake. Both felt inadequate. The second unsettling thing came the next morning. I woke at 3:07 a.m. with the sensation of being watched from inside the room. My phone screen glowed on the nightstand. There was a new notification from a number I didn't recognize. No words, just a single file attached, a video. I hesitated, breath freezing at the thought, but the file name was my apartment address. I tapped it, and the room on my screen filled with the familiar view. My living room from the angle of someone standing at my front door. The timestamp on the file read 2:43 a.m., 34 minutes before I had woken up. The figure moved through the frame, slow and careful, and again the face was mine. Watching it now, I felt the rules of my life sheared away. It's important to say, I am not a paranoid man by nature. Childhood in small-town Oregon taught me that the world mostly moves on without dramatics. But 2 videos in less than 24 hours with me in them, me doing things I'd never done, teased a seam in reality. The soundtrack hummed low, a mechanical resonance that felt wrong on my teeth. It wasn't a perfect deepfake. Pixels shimmered in odd places, like a heat haze, especially around the eyes. The mouth synced where it should. But the micro-expressions, the small, involuntary twitches that betray truth, were wrong. That's what scared me. Whoever had made this, or whatever had recorded it, had access not only to my image but to a mimicry of my mannerisms. At 9 a.m., I called my sister June, who lives in Seattle. We barely spoke for an hour before she asked, "Does this have Yoho?" And then stopped, the words swallowed. I finished it for her. Creeped. She asked questions like a doctor taking vitals. Who else knows? Any threats? Passwords changed. I lied about some things, said I hadn't told my boss. Lying felt safer, a small island of control. After we hung up, I changed every password, deleted accounts, enabled two-factor on everything, and still the unease didn't leave my throat. Around noon, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a small Polaroid print, the glossy surface warm from someone else's hands. It was the kitchen in my apartment, the sink, the kettle, the shredded curtains I'd never noticed were so threadbare, shot from the corridor outside. In the corner of the photograph was a scrap of fabric, like the corner of a jacket, slightly out of focus. On the back, in hurried ballpoint, someone had written, "Do you remember this night?" There was no signature. The handwriting looked almost like mine, but unsure, as if someone had tried to imitate it quickly and failed. That night, I slept with the hallway light on. I rationalized the fear. Maybe it was an elaborate stunt, a viral marketing campaign. Maybe someone had access to intimate footage through the building's security cameras. Maybe I was losing my mind. The rationalizations were thin bandages on a deeper cut. I had a very practical fear now, being observed in the parts of my life I thought private. The thought turned every shadow into an interrogation. The third incident came at 3 in the morning 2 nights later. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown email, subject line: "You were not in your living room." The body contained a single frame, an image freeze from the interior of my bedroom, showing the bed, the lamp, and a pair of footprints in the dust on the hardwood floor leading away from the bedside table. The footprints were my shoe size. They led to the hallway door and then disappeared. I walked the apartment after that, floorboards creaking under my weight, the way the air felt oddly denser in the corner near the bookcase. Everything seemed normal. The kettle worked, the mail I had left on the counter was where I'd left it, no signs of forced entry. But the dust on the floor by my bed told a different story. There were no prints now, nothing but an odd smudge, like a hand had wiped a line clean. My breath made a sound I didn't recognize. I began to take measures less visible than password changes. I unplugged the router, covered the webcam on my laptop with a thick strip of tape, swept every room with a flashlight searching for pinholes in walls, tiny lenses, camouflage devices. In the corner by the coat rack I found what I expected to find: nothing. In the ceiling light fixture there was only dust, and the ghost outline where the bulb had been. My neighbor Liza caught me inspecting the hallway one night and, with a half smile, said, "You okay, Cam? You look like you're trying to find a ghost." I wanted to laugh and tell her nothing supernatural had happened, that I'd simply misread a couple of prank videos. Instead, I told her I was fine. At this point, people would propose explanations: deep fakes, elaborate surveillance, stalkers with too much time and skill. All plausible. But then the video surfaced where the figure that looked like me, sat at my kitchen table and wrote something on a sheet of paper. The slow deliberation of the writing made my skin go tight. The camera panned close to the paper near the end of the clip, and there, in blocky handwriting, were 3 words. "Remember what's mine." It's small things, handwriting, the way the figure bent his neck, that made logic fray. I have handwriting analysis on my desk now, not because I trust it, but because I needed someone to give vernacular to the prickling sensation in my scalp. An anonymous analyst online said the letters were formed with pressure in different places I would use, but the slant was slightly off. It read like a mime of me, not a mirror. "Somebody knows you," she typed back. "Or somebody knows what you know." The terror was not merely that someone could imitate me convincingly. The terror was that the imitation had taken liberties with my life, arranging scenes I'd never lived, touching marks I didn't bear, writing threats I'd never read. It was as if someone had borrowed my outline and begun to sketch new interior rooms inside it. I am telling you this because the real problem began when the video labeled with my name started appearing offline, on obscure message boards, then in private messages to colleagues, then, to my slow, rising horror, on a flash drive left in the mailbox of the small independent cafe I frequent. I found it because the barista handed it to me with a look I will never forget, pity folded into curiosity. That morning the owner of the cafe looked at me as if I'd walked into a fire. "You need to see this, Cam," she said quietly. I watched the drive's video in the back room of the cafe, head bowed, the smell of coffee and warm pastries wrapping around me like normal life trying to hang on. The file contained footage I hadn't seen before, the figure, my face, sitting still, speaking directly at the camera. No words, just a long, awful stare that felt like a patient peeling back of something thin and secret. Then the figure smiled, not the way I do, but a flat, practiced thing, and mouthed 3 words without sound. "It's ready for you." I left the cafe and walked in circles for hours, clutching a paper bag of unsold croissants like proof I'd been somewhere ordinary. The city went on, a bus hissed by, cyclists threaded gaps in traffic, a child laughed at a dog. Normality felt like the thinnest of veils, and beneath it there was a hum, an insistence, that something in the pattern of my life had been altered. Some of you listening will want an exact sequence of investigations, IP traces, legal steps, police reports. I did some of that. The police told me to preserve evidence and gave me a report number. Their faces were a kind, compassionate, and mildly bored expression you see when the world's strange problems collide with quotidian procedure. They were helpful in a way hospitals are helpful, sterile, procedural, not the bomb I needed. A cyber investigator I paid out of pocket tracked upload nodes to dead ends. A private detective sent me a single photograph he swore was taken outside my building at night. I held that photograph under the kitchen light until the edges hurt. The figure in the printout, my twin in the way strangers talk of seeing double on the train, looked up from a doorway, as if glancing back at the camera that observed me. It was around this time I started keeping a log on paper instead of digitally. The log became ritual, time, event, sensation. Writing by hand felt safer, like scribbles could hold the world in place. On a Tuesday at 2:06 a.m. I wrote. Screeching noise in pipes felt like fingers in the vents. On a Friday. Dream of mirror that was someone else. These entries are mundane where terror would have demanded flourish, but ordinary detail is what keeps the listener believing. There's a particular moment I keep returning to, a Wednesday at dusk, rain thrumming on the windows, when I sat on the floor of my living room and watched the video back again, frame by frame, until my eyes stung. At 32:11 in the clip the figure paused, fingers hovering over the edge of a photograph pinned to a refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a seahorse. The photograph was of my mother and me at a lake when I was 6. The figure on screen turned the photograph around. On the reverse side was a small, crude drawing, 2 stick figures, one labeled C and one labeled H. Underneath, a date, 6 years from now. I don't have children. I don't have a partner. I don't know anyone whose name starts with H that I'd invite into that private space. The date was too specific to be random. It made the footage a map, not merely a mirror. Someone had sketched out a future they intended me to walk into. I stopped sleeping for long stretches. I began to carry my keys like a talisman and to sleep with the television on low static because a low noise made the dark of the apartment feel less complete, less hospitable. I started to catch glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces, the bus window, the dark glass of the microwave, always at the periphery, always when my back was turned. And then I received the first voicemail. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was a careful, breathless whisper. Look behind you. Nothing else. The message length 5 seconds. I sat in my car outside the building with the engine running until it felt like a fever had broken. Then I went upstairs, opened my apartment door, and found the kitchen chair turned to face the hallway as if someone had been waiting to see who'd come back. The chair was an ordinary wooden thing with a chip in the varnish. The chip is small, nothing, but it made the moment grotesque. Someone had placed the chair with deliberation. I lifted it, put it where it belonged, and didn't sleep that night. This is where I stop for now. I will tell you more because the small, uncanny things keep folding inward, and because once you know the shape of the fear it's more honest to follow it to its edge. I don't know who that figure is, and I don't know whether it is a hoax or something more cunning. What I can tell you without false drama is that the world I thought belonged to me is being used as material for a narrative I never agreed to. When your life is repurposed, the theft is intimate. It settles on the corners of your meals, in the creases of your sleep, and the messages you ignore. I will continue this in the next part. There are places this goes that I could not have imagined when I first clicked the thumbnail. There are doors that open without creak, and there are people who insist they never left their houses. There are conversations you will hear that I never had, and there are rooms I will have to enter to find answers I do not want. When I opened my front door the morning after the chair, it felt like crossing an invisible line. The hallway smelled like the office building on Thursdays, old coffee and the faint chemical tang of cleaning solution, though no one had cleaned. My neighbors shuffled by with earbuds and umbrellas, blind to whatever thread of strangeness had been stitched through my life. Inside, the apartment hummed with an ordinary fidelity: the kettle, the radiator, the persistent low creak in the floor where the joists meet the wall. Normality, for the moment, still held its shape. But the footage kept arriving. It was never the same clip twice. Sometimes the videos were short, an angle showing the corner of my bookshelf, the way I arranged my novels by color instead of author. Sometimes they were long, mundane hours where the figure, my face, my frame, moved through routines like a rehearsed actor, making coffee, scrolling on a phone I don't own, pausing at a window and tracing a line on the glass. Once, in a clip that lasted nearly an hour, the figure sat at my kitchen table and did nothing but stare at a blank wall. The silence in that file lodged itself in my ribs like a stone. I bought a second phone and a cheap camcorder and began to document the apartment myself, not to capture more evidence, but to feel like I was mapping the territory of my life. I set cameras in corners I'd never considered and learned the angles the rooms preferred. When the new footage appeared on anonymous sites, it was always one step ahead, showing me in positions and places I'd only just walked away from. It was the opposite of coincidence. The videos knew the shadows behind my knees, the exact curl of the sofa's fabric at the spot I never sit, the place where the paint is chipped on the window frame. 3 times now, someone had left me physical tokens: the Polaroid, the flash drive, and then, one gray morning, a small tin box on my doormat. Inside were 3 objects arranged like a ritual: a single mother-of-pearl button, a dried clover pressed flat like a coin, and a strip of paper torn from a page with 2 words written in a hand that oscillated between slanted and upright. Find him. There is a human logic to terror that I prefer to follow. If someone wants something, they usually leave clues. If they intend to unsettle, they choose objects that matter, that could belong to anyone yet feel intimate when arranged with deliberation. The clover could have blown in from the sidewalk, the button might be from a coat I no longer own. But the instruction, find him, felt less like guidance and more like a demand from a scriptwriter who'd decided to rent the stage of my life. I started asking people. Not loudly, a careful, whispering campaign. I asked the barista at the cafe if anyone had asked for the flash drive back, if a regular had been acting odd. I asked my sister if she'd seen any strangers near our childhood lake house. I asked the building manager, under the guise of requesting a maintenance check, whether anyone had been in my hallway late at night. Answers were always polite and narrow. "We had a leak on the 2nd floor last week," the manager said. "Probably someone there." No, nobody mentioned anything. The world crowded around the edges of the question and refused to enter the center. A private detective named Ortiz agreed to do a cursory search for me after I paid in cash and explained less than half of what had happened, because even saying the words out loud felt like inviting them to stretch fingers into my life. Ortiz was all shoulders and midnight patience. His office smelled faintly of tobacco and old receipts. He came back with a small file and a photograph taken from across the street one rainy evening, a silhouette at my window, fingers splayed, the light behind them haloing the outline of a head. "You ever known anyone with a habit of standing in doorways?" he asked, looking at me over the rim of a mug. "No," I said. "Not like that. Whoever it is, they're careful," he said. "This was taken with a long lens. From a distance. Someone was watching you for a while. Careful." The word echoed, because that detail, care, calculation, made it feel less like childish mischief and more like art, a long, cruel composition built from my gestures. If this was a campaign, it was painstaking. If it was a person, they had the patience of patience's opposite. At 3 in the morning 3 nights after Ortiz's call, my phone rang. I usually let unknown numbers go to voicemail, but something in my muscles tightened into an instinctual answering. A voice, quiet and steady, said, "Look at your door." No inflection, no pause. It might have been a human voice. It might have been recorded and set to play like a clock. I swung my legs over the bed, the floor cold under my feet, and went to the door like someone walking to a stage. There, taped directly to the surface, was a small square of paper with a single word: him. My chest went cold enough that I sat down on the floor and laughed a small, ridiculous laugh. I tried to be rational. Maybe a neighbor had a vendetta, maybe a prankster had access to my mail. Rationality felt like fine print at the bottom of a contract I'd already signed. Hunters have rules. When a gun is pointed at you metaphorically, sometimes you do the smallest, most human acts: take inventory, talk to friends, sleep. My friends were helpful in their ordinary, partial ways. June booked a weekend ticket for me to go stay with her, insisting I get away from the apartment. I thought of going, of leaving the stage to catch my breath. The night before my trip, I slept poorly and then woke to an image in my head like a splinter. A man, my man, standing at the edge of a lake with his hands in his pockets, while something behind him moved slowly along the tree line. The dream felt less like sleep and more like a replay of footage I'd seen at the cafe, except I'd never seen this. I canceled the train in the morning. The protest of staying felt irrational and yet necessary, as if leaving would hand them a victory composed of my absence. The arrogance in that decision was small and combustible. Days later, the morning after I would have been in Seattle, a short video appeared on a private forum with a single frame, a train seat, empty, a ticket torn and abandoned on the armrest with my name printed on it. The caption under the post read, simply, "He chose." Someone was scripting my life choices and leaving me the applause and the crumbs. There came a clip that changed the tenor of all of it. It began like the others, a view of my apartment from a narrow angle. The figure moved in, closed the door, and then, this is the part that still wakes me, the figure opened a closet I used to store an old trunk. Inside the trunk is a bundle of objects I'd never shown anyone: letters from an ex, a sweater my grandmother knitted, a small paper envelope with a child's handwriting that spelled my name wrong. It's embarrassing, the way those objects feel like confession booths. The figure rifled through the trunk as if archaeologist and thief. Then it did something I had never done and never would. It pulled out the envelope and tore it open. The camera zoomed in on the paper folded inside. In block letters, as if tracing a child's defiance, were 3 words: "You remember him." My hands went numb. I had been trying to forget a boy named Henry who had been significant when I was 15. Henry had been the kind of person who folded secrets into friendship like origami. When we parted, the smoothness of our lives changed. I had not thought of him in years. I did not tell June about Henry when she asked me if I had anyone from long ago to call. I rolled his absence into the list of late adolescent privacy like one collects stamps, reluctant to show, afraid of losing the quiet. The figure had unearthed memory as if it were a tool. It felt like a message and like theft at the same time. Someone, something, had dug into the small, discarded parts of my life and arranged them to attract my attention. It is the shape of obsession, not only to watch but to compile, not only to reproduce but to pry open the sealed places. I decided, irrationally and bravely, to reach out to Henry. The last I had heard, he moved to a town 2 hours away and taught woodwork. His number was on an old card I kept tucked inside a cookbook. I called on a Thursday. The line rang twice and a voice answered, surprised and slow, like someone being pulled from a lake. He lived 2 hours away still, he said, and ironically enough, he'd been cleaning out the garage of their parents' old house, where we used to meet to smoke cigarettes and promise each other the world, and found a Polaroid of us on a pier. He thought of me when he found it, he said. I told him about the videos in vague terms and he laughed nervously, then stopped. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. His voice had not changed much from the one in my memory. That gave me a small bubble of relief, and then it burst. "Do you remember me?" I asked finally, because the demand in the videos had planted itself like seed. A long pause. Then, "I do," Henry said. "I remember you better than most." Have you been in Portland?" I asked. "No," he said. "But I've been seeing things online. People posting fragments. I thought it was just coincidence." We exchanged the kind of words you need to keep a connection from fraying, the banal updates, the weather, the way the shop on Main Street had closed. He didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer, about whether he'd ever heard his name spoken in strange places. When we hung up, there was a small, fierce feeling of relief that someone had remembered the same past. If someone wanted me to find him, maybe finding Henry would break the chain. Maybe the imitation would have to collapse when faced with a real person from my history. Maybe. The first meeting was awkward and cinematic in the worst way. We chose a diner equidistant from our towns, linoleum, vinyl booths, a jukebox the owner pretended not to keep stocked. Henry walked in with hands big enough to fill a handful of my problems. He had a scar on his knuckle from a lathe accident he told me about without flourish. He looked like a man who had lived in his hands. We ate in companionable silence for a while, both of us ordering with the kind of certainty that comes from people who have been seen enough to no longer be performative. I told him about the videos slowly at first, skipping the parts that made me sound hysterical and focusing on the artifacts. The Polaroid, the note, the clip of someone rifling through my trunk. His face adjusted as I spoke, like someone assessing a piece of furniture for hidden drawers. Then Henry did something that unsettled me more than the videos. He took out a small envelope and slid it across the table. Inside were 3 items exactly like the ones from my tin, a button identical to mine, a dried clover flattened as if under the same pressure of a book, and a strip of paper with the same jagged hand. Find him. He hadn't put them there, at least he claimed he hadn't. He said he'd found them in his mailbox 2 days before, and he had no idea what they meant. The replication felt impossibly specific, like someone had copied out a recipe from my life and mailed it back to its author with a note that said, "Remember." We left the diner with more questions and fewer answers. A mutual friend drove us back, and the silence between Henry and me that night was not empty but full of the hum of something watching. At some angle it felt like progress. 2 people who shared a history had been summoned to the same footnote. At another angle it felt like the crescendo of a story I had no control over. That week the videos shifted focus. Where once they had been intimate, mirror, trunk, kitchen table, they began to stage public scenes, footage of me walking down a street I had frequented in college, the figure bending to tie a shoelace outside a record shop, standing at a bus stop in the rain. The clips were recorded from angles that suggested someone following the subject, like a documentary of obsession. Once, the figure paused and touched the shoulder of another man in the frame, someone who looked faintly like Henry, and then the footage cut out. The cut felt deliberate, as if someone were composing a narrative with chapters and leaving the final page blank for me to write. It is difficult to explain how loneliness multiplies in these moments. There is a kind of thinness that creeps into daily rhythms, a sensation that the world is a stage and the rest of humanity is a background actor poorly lit. People go about their days, the barista, the bus driver, the man who waters the plants in the lobby, and their ordinariness becomes a kind of protection I can't afford. They are unaware shields around a secret I cannot explain. The more I try to make sense, the more elaborate the pretense of meaning becomes. You think all you ask for is an audience when what you really crave is a collaborator. I began to dream of rooms sewn into rooms. I dreamed of opening a wardrobe and finding not coats but alleys, of walls that folded back into other people's kitchens. In my dreams I walked through neighborhoods that bled into one another, and in the center of every dream there was always a camera lens turning toward me, patient and amused. One night, in a fit of something between defiance and futility, I uploaded one of my own recordings to a private cloud and left a comment on it for the anonymous producers of my life. "Who are you? What do you want?" I expected silence and got, instead, a reply within an hour, by a user with no profile and a single post. Find him. The word had become a chorus. I am telling you all of this because the pressure keeps building. The tokens, the recordings, the way my past is being folded into a present I did not choose. Each new clip is a room where someone else has rearranged the furniture. Each gesture the figure makes is an argument. You belong to story now. And stories, once written, have their own hunger. They demand endings or else they linger and grow teeth. There will be more in the next part. The chase accelerates. The cameras draw closer, and the people who appear, friends, strangers, the ghost imitation of me, begin to speak in the language of things, leaving messages that are not words but placements and angles and hands. I will tell you where this leads, and I will try to explain the moment when imitation becomes something else, an attempt to replace rather than mirror. When the illusion stops being a prank and starts being a plan, the space between what you know and what you fear narrows until it's a single blade. That's how it felt the morning the footage became more than observation and transformed into invitation. I had started to accept small invasions, the Polaroid, the voicemail, the tin of trinkets, but this was different. This was the moment someone stopped tracing my life and began writing with my hand. It began with a parcel left at my building's concierge desk, nothing extravagant, a padded envelope with my name in blocky type. Inside were 3 things arranged in a deliberate line like a countdown: an old key, a photograph of a house I had never seen, and a folded note. The photograph was simple: a porch light, a sagging step, a mailbox with peeling paint. The back of the photograph had a single line written in the same unstable handwriting that had been haunting me for weeks. He waits at the porch light. At noon my phone buzzed. An untraceable number. A video file. The clip was short, 47 seconds, and shot from across a street at dusk. The figure in the footage stood under a porch light that glowed like a slow-held ember. It was not my apartment, not a place I knew, and yet the figure's profile was unmistakable. The slope of my nose, the small nick near the eyebrow I'd gotten climbing trees as a kid. The figure stood utterly still under the lamp. In the last frames, it turned its face toward the camera and raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. There was no mouth movement, no sound. The caption that appeared under the post on the private forum read, "Come find him." I had been feeling hunted. Now the hunter announced a meeting place. I thought first of Henry. The demand in the messages, "Find him," had once felt like an instruction to look for a missing part of my life. Now it had a different cadence. Find him, an imperative that could mean find the person the imitator wanted me to meet, or find the man the perpetual camcorder had been cataloging, or find the core of this arrangement, and confront it. I called Henry, and told him I was going. He said nothing for a long time and then, in the kind way of someone who understands storms, asked for the address. The house in the photograph sat 3 hours away in a town so small that the highway surrendered to 2 lanes and then to a country road. The town's grid was a polite, tired thing: 1 diner, a hardware store, a church with a steeple whose paint had given up on being white. The porch light on the photograph was exactly as it had been in the envelope: a warm island in the fog that seemed to have been personalized for the man under it. We drove in silence until silence was all that fit. Henry navigated by memory and small talk, and I watched the road curve like a question mark. The deeper we went into the countryside, the more my life felt like an object being transported, one of those fragile glass sculptures wrapped in bubble wrap that will arrive at its destination marred. We pulled into a gravel driveway whose outline matched the photograph and got out. The house was older than it looked in the print, its porch sagging and wood-grained with rain. The porch light was on and everything about the house smelled of dust and old citrus, a smell I associate with laundromats and my grandmother's kitchen. No one answered when we knocked. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house held itself like a pause play. Chairs were draped with sheets, but the outline of a life remained: a mantel with mismatched frames, a kettle on an unlit stove, a bookshelf organized with strange fastidiousness, encyclopedias, then paperbacks, then more encyclopedias. The air was the temperature of memory. We moved room by room, not in the practiced stealth of criminals but in the careful, curious way people look around a place that isn't theirs and try to find the seams. On the kitchen table lay a printout of still frames from videos I had only ever seen online. The figure at my window, the trunk scene, the stand in the rain. Each frame was pinned with a simple tack, annotated in the same uncertain hand with notes like mirror, trunk, train. It was a scrapbook and a plan. Someone had catalogued my life like an archivist. On a pegboard above the table, a dozen keys hung from nails, each labeled in the same cramped script. Front, basement, studio, locker. The old key inside the envelope matched one of them exactly. It fit the lock on a narrow door at the back of the house that opened on a dark staircase. The stairs creaked anciently, and somewhere below us a faint hum, like a projector, kept time. As we descended, the air cooled. The basement smelled like old paper and rain. Light pooled from a single bulb that hummed in the way bad bulbs hum, a low, insistent note that seemed to keep secrets awake. The room at the bottom was stripped of pretension. It was an office without a desk, a bunker of intention. Against the far wall, monitors stood like sentinels, and on those monitors my life played in careful, looping montage. Security camera angles I didn't own fed the screens. There were time-stamped clips we had never seen, fragments of nights where I had been home, but the footage showed another figure moving in my apartment, in the exact corners I had checked with flashlights. Each clip felt like a confession from a watchful machine. But the strangest thing in that basement was a small chair facing a camera. On the chair lay a Polaroid of me at 12, laughing, hair sticky from a summer lake. Beside the Polaroid a sheet of paper had been taped down. Across it, someone had written in big, blocky letters. Sit. Remember. I sat because the compulsion that had been pulling at me for weeks had become a physical ache. The chair fit like a word does when you almost complete a sentence. I sat and the camera clicked like an eye, and for a moment I thought one of the monitors would show nothing more than the back of my head. Instead, the monitor above my shoulder played a new clip, me, sitting, now, in the chair in a room I recognized not as my own but as this house's basement, saying something in a voice I did not hear because the clip contained no audio. The image on the screen blurred and then sharpened to the figure on the porch light. It raised its hand in the same slow, deliberate wave. A card beneath that monitor had one line, typed, not handwritten. You were always better close. Henry grabbed my arm then, the way someone grabs a friend at the bottom of a dock just before they jump. He looked at me the way only a friend can, with equal parts concern and fury and the exact small kindness of someone who knows you are more terrified of becoming the idea of yourself than you are of the immediate peril. We take evidence, he said, practical as a carpenter. We call somebody. We leave. Leave where? I asked, though the question was more rhetorical than useful. Leave meant letting the thin filament the perpetrator had cast across our lives go taut. Leave meant admitting that we were not enough to stop whatever script was being written. We left the house with a single frame from a monitor tucked into a pocket, a photograph of the porch light figure as it turned its head and looked directly into the camera. Henry insisted we bring the print to Ortiz, who, despite his ordinary cynicism, agreed the photo warranted escalation. He set up a secure drop and said, with his permanent squint, "Somebody wanted you to find that house." Back in Portland, normality was thinner than when we'd left. It felt like a coat someone had stolen half of. The videos accelerated. The figure appeared in places I had been that day, the record store, the laundromat, the park bench, always in those exact proportions, always their head cocked slightly as if listening. Internet threads became theaters of speculation. Strangers argued passionately about deep fakes and occult mimicry, about whether the phenomenon belonged to art or outrage. I read some of it, then stopped. I wanted explanation but feared it would transform into spectatorship, people tuned to my life for the drama of my confusion. The next escalation was physical and small and therefore more terrifying than any grand gesture. On the edge of my bed, perfectly centered on my pillow, I found the Polaroid from the basement chair. The photograph showed me at 12 again, hair wet and eyes squinting in sun, and beneath it, in the same unstable hand, 3 words. You sat alone. The hand that could stand inside my life and reorder its private things had a vocabulary I could not predict, sometimes poetic, sometimes menacing. Always intimate. That night I dreamed of the chair again. In the dream, a camera in the ceiling recorded me sleeping, and the camera's red dot did not blink with malice so much as curiosity. I woke with the sheet tangled around my legs and the thick taste of copper in my mouth that sometimes heralds panic. We tried to fight back in a practical, boring way. We bought signal jammers, had locks changed, set up our own cameras, and still the clips found their way onto servers. I filed a police report that was thicker than the earlier one, and this time officers came by to collect fingerprints and asked me to sign a form saying I had been threatened. They were kind in their municipal way and brought kits that smelled like antiseptic. They lifted prints of a doorknob and took photocopies of the Polaroids. I watched them with the odd sensation that I had invited them into someone else's diary. Then there was the day the video showed me speaking a name. I had not spoken it aloud for more than a decade. On screen, the figure, my face, my frame, sat in my living room, lips parting as if to speak. The caption beneath the clip on the private forum was the single name I'd never expected to see typed in public. Harper. Harper was a name from a time before Henry, from the brittle, immediate adolescent years when identity feels malleable. Harper was someone whose existence I had tried to quietly erase because they had been the axis of a small shame I'd preferred to keep private. Seeing the name felt like cold light spilled on a wound. I told Henry about Harper and the way the name sounded like a bell tolling. He frowned, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw his patience snap. He asked me if I had enemies the way a man asks if you have allergies. I wanted to say yes because every day felt like an allergic reaction to the world, but the only list I could make included people I had long since forgiven and places I had left behind. The message boards began to pile up with theories that I'd once hurt someone who now sought to emulate me to get revenge, that I was the protagonist in some art school installation, that I was mentally ill and projecting. The worst hypothesis, mental unreason, seemed to be the shelter for every skeptic. I resented it more than I judged it, because if my life was a product of my own head, then I had no recourse but to wait until the fever broke. The turning point, the hinge on which everything else swung, came when I decided to stop watching them. For 2 days I unplugged. I put my phone in a drawer, left my laptop at a relative's house, and tried to live with the fragile dignity of a person pretending time might heal by ignoring its wounds. I went to work, wrote reports, ate lunch outside on a bench and counted the pigeons, 1, 2, 3 in a list until numbers settled my pulse. On the 3rd day, I came home to find my door already ajar. Inside, my apartment looked like the stage after actors leave, chairs slightly askew, a mug with lipstick at the rim, a book face down. On the coffee table the television played a pause frame, my living room, as viewed from the exact angle of my entry. The image on the screen was recent, the timestamp read half an hour before my return. On the screen the figure, my figure, had taken off its shoes and placed them neatly under the couch. Only that detail was unnerving because I never arranged my shoes neatly. There was a small envelope stuck to the television with a note that said simply, "We are close." That night I slept in the kitchen with knives under my pillow and the kettle within reach. I told myself that was silly and then, later, found myself sitting on the floor at 3 a.m., listening to the pipes and hoping for the dull comfort of mechanical sound. The steps in the hallway sounded like small measured apologies. I kept waiting for the next big reveal, a masked intruder, an explanation that had logic, but the intrusions were always precise and small, like punctuation marks. 2 days later, Henry called from his truck. "They're in my shed," he said, breathless, and I felt the sentence cut. He had been farmhouse close to paranoia, checking his locks and routes, and yet someone had used his life in the same predatory way. He'd found a Polaroid of him at 17, taped inside his own hand tool cabinet, with a note that read, "You remember him?" The phrase had traveled from my trunk to his mailbox like a contagion. We met and decided, foolishly bravely, to confront. We drove to the small house again with Ortiz in tow, and this time, among the monitors and the keys, we found something new, a stack of prints of faces, not mine but his, people from the peripheries of my life, pinned up like photos in a detective's board and connected with yarn. Henry's face had its own circle. So did a college professor I thought of as a mentor, the barista at the cafe where I worked every Wednesday morning. Someone had been mapping not just me, but everyone close enough to me to be useful. On the basement table, beneath a lamp that hummed like a trapped insect, lay a binder with a cover that read in block letters. Blueprint. Inside, diagrams of apartment layouts, notes on times, a list of habits. Leaves keys on counter, sleeps with TV on. And at the very back, one line written large and underlined. Replace. Replace. The word is mundane in one context and lethal in another. On its face it is an action. In this document it read as intent. Replace the man, replace the life, insert a substitute, and let it age into authenticity. The binder made the criminality systemic. Someone wasn't just watching, they were designing. We left that house and filed for a warrant. The legal language was a different kind of theater, forms, signatures, solemn officers promising action. For a moment I believed in procedure because procedure is a language humans invented to keep other humans from becoming monsters. But the world of legal paperwork moves slowly, and our adversary, if adversary is the right word, was patient. The night before the officers executed the warrant, I received a final clip. It was shorter than the others and shot in black and white. The figure, my face, my frame, stood at the edge of a lake, the kind I'd been to when I was younger, hands in pockets as if waiting. Behind him, half hidden by trees, a second figure moved slowly, indistinct. The posted caption read, "This is how he waits." Beneath it, in the same jagged script, a note. "We begin at dawn." We went to sleep with the false intimacy of people who think sleep is a plan. Dawn is not dramatic in the way movies make it. It arrives slow, patient, ordinary. The warrant execution team was punctual and professional. We drove out to the house with the wary optimism of people who have rehearsed fear and rehearsed courage in equal measures. At the house the officers moved like a concerted animal, searching, photographing, calling out rooms. They found the monitors and lifted hard drives. They found the pegboard of keys and cataloged them. They found the basement chair and the Polaroid and the binder. They took fingerprints and photographed the notes. They found, in a locked trunk beneath a floorboard, a series of masks, simple face coverings crafted with a disturbingly accurate likeness of me. They found a collection of clothing arranged by size and wear, and in the topmost drawer, folded with care, a handwritten journal. The journal was the thing I thought I would plead to read last. When I opened it under the lamp's scrutiny, the handwriting inside was not as unstable as the notes. It was calm and began with a sentence that made my head swim. "I learned to be him so no one would miss what he lost." The entries that followed were clinical, dates, observations, experiments in mimicry. The author had written about practicing laughter in a mirror, about trimming hair to match, about studying my online comments to catch inflections. Mostly, though, the journal read like a chronicle of absence, someone cataloging what I had and planning, as if with devotion, to inherit it. The police asked me if I wanted to press charges. The language of law is precise. The man, because it turned out to be a man, not some spectral force, was taken into custody weeks later after a trail led through an alias and into a life of quiet disappearance. His name was something banal and unremarkable. He was, I am told, solitary, obsessed, meticulous. The news feeds called him a stalker, a hoarder of other people's moments. They put him on television panels where experts explained his actions like a case study. People read the story and nodded and then went back to their days, convinced the plot had closed. The thing is, the prints and the masks and the journal explained a terrible lot and nothing at all. The binder explained method but not motive. The journal showed devotion but not malice. The man in custody, if that is the right phrase for one who was led into a cell, sat in interviews and said things that were both banal and chilling. He was easy to study, he said. He had habits like a map. He spoke about filling in empty places in his own life with someone else's. He spoke about practice. What he could not describe, and what perhaps either of us could ever cleanly name, was the sensation of having your life repurposed. It was not stolen in the way money is stolen. It was not taken with force. It crept, patient and exact, into blank spaces and rearranged them. He had not only watched, he had rehearsed being me until his gestures fit. He had tried to become the comfortable echo in the room. In court, the man did not make me feel vindicated. He made me feel small and strangely complicit. I had fed his material by living and posting and moving in ways he found useful. If there's a moral in this, it is useless. Living in the modern world means leaving breadcrumbs, and some creatures, human or otherwise, collect breadcrumbs with a devotion that can become monstrous. The court convicted him on the technicalities: trespass, harassment, theft of property, and he was sentenced to years in a facility where he would have a bed and some supervision and perhaps therapy. The news wrote the narrative into a tidy shape: stalker caught, victim moves on. But moving on is not a clean motion. I kept Polaroids in a drawer as proof of the life someone had tried to copy. I locked doors and changed routines and still felt like an actor who had been overheard improvising a life he thought private. I learned to set cameras not to catch monsters but to reassure myself that the rooms were still the rooms I knew. Henry and I drank coffee and tried to measure the distance between what had been and what was left. We spoke of small things, how a laugh once could be whole in the mouth and now felt borrowed. We spoke badly and tenderly about forgiveness. He told me once, looking at the television as if it were the window to a less complicated life, "You are not his project, Cam." The sentence was both obvious and not. I repeated it until it filled my mouth properly. Sometimes, months after the arrests and the reports and the court dates, I still see video of the man on forums where strangers compare notes about uncanny likenesses. I do not watch. There are nights when the hum of the refrigerator sounds like a projector, and I imagine monitors in basements playing my life on loop. The journal sits in a file cabinet in the evidence room guarded by people whose faces look tired and compassionate. I am told the journal will be turned over to mental health professionals as a case study. The truth, the small human truth I learned, is that imitation can become a kind of theft more intimate than robbery. When someone copies your laugh, your gestures, your private rituals, they do more than replicate. They attempt erasure by substitution. They build a life on your scaffolding until the original structure seems optional. For months I feared that the man had succeeded, that if he practiced enough, people might start believing him instead. That terror fades in small, reliable ways: my sister calling, June's laugh when she tells me something stupid, Henry bringing lobster rolls and telling me stories from the lathe, a barista smiling because she knows how I take my coffee. These are small, stubborn threads of authenticity. I do not have a tidy moral to end on. I have evidence and scars and a new habit of checking locks twice. I have friendships that were tested and found to be capable of strange, human tenderness. I have the persistent knowledge that privacy in the age of cameras is not a default but a fragile treaty you must actively defend. I have nightmares that sometimes come and sometimes do not. I have also, oddly, regained a sense of the world's peculiarity, its ability to hold both kindness and mischief. When people ask me now about the videos, I tell them the simple facts and then stop. There is a part of the story that belongs to the man who made the imitation. He deserves to be examined, to be understood, to be dealt with by law and care. There is another part that belongs to the life he copied, the small details, the memories, the private jokes. Those belong to me and to the people who loved me first. I protect them the way you protect a photograph you tuck into a wallet, with a kind of reverent stubbornness. Sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is absolutely still, I turn on an old camcorder and record nothing: an empty chair, a window with rain on the glass. I leave it running for an hour or two. I watch the playback later and see nothing extraordinary, but the act comforts me. It's not about catching an intruder. It's about making a measure. I am here. This is mine. I won't say the fear ever fully leaves. It is a fossil embedded in my everyday now, a grain in a shell. But stories change shape when you tell them. They lose some of their teeth and grow some of their meaning. In the years since the man was caught and the forums moved on to other spectacles, I have tried to retake my life as a thing I can shape and render, A life that is mine not by ownership but by the small acts of fidelity we call habit, a call to a sister, an old photograph tucked back into a drawer, friends who answer the phone. If you listen to this and feel the prickle that comes when someone else wakes you up in the night, when you find a Polaroid in your mailbox or a message on an anonymous forum, trust that prickle. It is a body's useful alert. Make a plan, talk to people, and if you can, keep the Polaroids in a drawer where it is just your hand that holds them. There are things in the world we cannot prevent, but there are also everyday redundancies, friends, locks, routines, that stitch us back when the seam splits. I have told you everything I can about how my life was pilfered and parceled out into someone else's devotion. There are no neat endings where fear evaporates. There are endings where the immediate danger is neutralized and then life continues with a deeper understanding of the value of small certainties. The man who copied me is behind bars and perhaps behind therapy panels and clinical observation. I do not wish him harm beyond what the law requires. I wish he finds whatever inside him seeks substitution controlled and healed. I, meanwhile, try to be less broadcastable, less photographable, less easy as a map. I learn to carry my life less like a public object and more like a private ceremony.